Perhaps the most famous moment of the 1997 UK general election is known today as the Portillo moment. This was the moment when Defence Secretary and Conservative Party star player Michael Portillo unexpectedly lost his House of Commons seat to an upstart Labour candidate named Stephen Twigg.
Portillo, Michael Denzil Xavier. Thank you, members. Conservative Party, 19,137. Twigg, Stephen, Labour Party, 20,000.
Portillo's shock defeat symbolized Labour's crushing landslide victory over the Conservative government in that election. But there is another party from that same election, mentioned just a few moments before the Portillo moment, that I want to talk about today.
Luard, Nicholas Lamont, Referendum Party, 1,342.
The Referendum Party? Who are they, right? If you don't remember these guys, that's hardly surprising. The Referendum Party only contested a single election at any level, that 1997 general election, and they lost very badly. How badly? Really badly. The Labour Party came in first place with 43.2% of the popular vote and over 60% of the seats in Parliament. The Referendum Party came in fourth place with a mere 2.6% of the vote and 0 seats in Parliament. Only a handful of the 505 Referendum Party candidates who stood for Parliament in 1997 received more than 5% of the vote, and not a single candidate received more than 7%. And, as I said, that was the only election the party ever contested. But despite such a poor showing, I would argue that the Referendum Party has ultimately had a much bigger impact on British life than Tony Blair's Labour government did. That's a big claim, and you may not agree, but keep watching to understand my reasons. The Referendum Party was founded in 1994 by Sir James Goldsmith. Now, Goldsmith is a pretty amazing character and probably deserves a video all of his own. But for now, let's just say these 3 particularly interesting facts about him. 1. Goldsmith was extraordinarily wealthy. And I mean Bruce Wayne wealthy.
What are your superpowers again?
I'm rich.
And when I compare James Goldsmith to Bruce Wayne, I mean that fairly literally. In 1994, his estimated wealth was £800 million, which was worth just over $1 billion at the time. Being a billionaire in 1994 was much more unusual than it is today, and in fact, DC Comics had always referred to Bruce Wayne as a millionaire.
Millionaire Bruce Wayne.
Until they upgraded him to billionaire in, wait for it, 1994. So basically, Goldsmith and Bruce Wayne both became billionaires at roughly the same time. 2. Goldsmith was active in both French and British politics simultaneously. He could do this as he had dual citizenship. He had been born in Paris and his mother was French. In his French political life, he was active in a breakaway faction of France's main centre-right party of the mid-1990s. And in June 1994, he was successfully elected to the European Parliament for France as a member of that party. So he was not only a French citizen when he founded the Referendum Party, but he was also serving in elected office in France at the same time. 3. The Referendum Party was not the only political party founded by Goldsmith. It was not even the only party he founded in 1994. In fact, it was not even the only political party founded by Goldsmith in November 1994. Along with his mates from the breakaway centre-right faction, he co-founded the Mouvement pour la France, or MPF, on 20th November 1994. But, like the Referendum Party, the MPF never amounted to much and fell into decline a few years after it was founded. A mere week after the formation of the MPF, however, on 27th November 1994, Goldsmith announced to the British media that he was founding a new political party in the UK, the Referendum Party. The Referendum Party was formed with one stated goal: for the UK to hold a national referendum on continued membership in the European Union. This goal was so central to the party that they claimed, if they ever were elected into government, they would immediately resign their seats in Parliament once a referendum was held. The official Referendum Party goal was only to hold a referendum and let the people decide what they wanted, either to stay in or leave the EU. In reality, Goldsmith and the Referendum Party spent most of their time rubbishing the EU and explaining why the UK should get out as fast as possible. For this reason, the Referendum Party is generally considered to have been Eurosceptic. If you're not familiar with this term, Eurosceptic, it's what people who supported Brexit were called before the word Brexit existed. Eurosceptics were much more than just skeptical about the EU. They generally argued that it was a rotten institution which deserved to be abolished. Goldsmith pledged £20 million of his own money to get the Referendum Party started, including £10 million for the upcoming 1997 election. £10 million may not sound like a massive campaign budget by today's standards, especially today's American standards, but trust me, this was an absolutely massive amount at the time. British elections, as you may know, are much shorter than American elections and are packed into a mere 5 to 6 weeks. They also rely much more on grassroots campaigning, like volunteers sticking leaflets through letterboxes, and much less on television advertising. To give you an idea, though, the party which won the 1997 election, the Labour Party, spent only £7.3 million. Goldsmith's £10 million campaign budget instantly made the Referendum Party a force to be reckoned with. The case Goldsmith made for the referendum on continued EU membership will sound familiar to anyone who has followed British politics in recent decades. Let's hear it from Goldsmith himself.
When we joined Europe, we were led to believe that we were joining a common trading market. The government promised us that our sovereignty would be protected. Secretly, and without our consent, our nation is disappearing into a single European superstate with one government, one parliament, one court of justice, one single currency, one flag, and even one anthem.
So Goldsmith wanted the UK to leave the EU, but the question remains, why hold a referendum? Nowadays, it seems perfectly natural for the UK to hold a referendum to decide any major constitutional issue. That's just how things are done in the UK, right? Actually, back in the 1990s, the idea of deciding anything by referendum in the UK was still largely untested. As constitutional instruments go, referendums had been, until very recently that is, considered very un-British. For example, former Prime Minister Clement Attlee called referendums alien to our traditions and an instrument of Nazism. Yes, according to Attlee, referendums are for Nazis. But, starting in the early 1970s, new countries joining the EU, or European Economic Community, as it was then, began holding referendums to give the act of joining some democratic legitimacy. Of course, I mean every country except the UK. For example, when Ireland, Denmark, the UK, and Norway were offered EU membership in 1973, each country held a national referendum to confirm their membership. Each country except the UK, of course. The British government of the day, still claiming that referendums were simply not British, said that any referendum would be unconstitutional. And by the way, the membership referendum held in Norway failed. It remains outside the EU today. But after seeing various European countries hold referendums on joining the EU without any obvious negative repercussions, the appetite for a referendum in the UK began to grow. Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who had previously called referendums contrary to our traditions, eventually bowed to public opinion and arranged for a referendum on membership in Europe to be held in 1975, 2 years after the UK had already joined. 67% of the British people voted to stay in, and so the UK stayed in. This was the first national referendum in British history, and, as of 1997, it was still the only one which had ever been held. Since the 1975 referendum result merely confirmed what was then the status quo, being a member of the EU, it was all a bit of a non-event in the end. This gave many people the mistaken idea that referendums were easily compatible with the British political system after all. 41 years later, however, the world learned that referendum results which do not endorse the status quo can generate years of political chaos in Britain. But that's another story. Despite referendums still being a fairly exotic method for making political decisions back in 1990s Britain, Goldsmith argued that another referendum on EU membership was exactly what the UK needed. I mean, what could go wrong? Besides, in Goldsmith's other home, France, referendums have been in use for over 200 years and, as we all know, this has led to lots and lots of political stability. So that is legacy number one for the Referendum Party. After the concept had gathered dust for nearly 20 years as a historical outlier, the Referendum Party's 1997 election campaign reinforced the idea that referendums were a workable and legitimate tool for managing constitutional change in the United Kingdom. Soon after the establishment of the Referendum Party, both Labour and the Conservatives began to embrace the idea of using referendums for managing constitutional change, including promising a referendum on whether or not to join the EU's single currency. As mentioned before, James Goldsmith was very, very wealthy. Bruce Wayne wealthy. Creating a successful political party from scratch in the UK is normally very difficult, but Goldsmith proved that it was much easier if you have enough money. The Referendum Party never built a full infrastructure, or developed an experienced activist base, but by using his fortune, Goldsmith was able to quickly make the party at least look like a much more significant player than it ever actually was. For example, the Referendum Party began running professionally designed full-page advertisements in national newspapers. Radio and television news programs in the UK routinely review the contents of national newspapers on air during their programs, so prominent newspaper appearances drove broadcast coverage for the party as well. So here's legacy number 2. The Referendum Party proved that with enough money, it was possible for single-issue parties to have a real impact on British politics. All political parties in the UK have major donors, of course, but wealthy Eurosceptic donors, following Goldsmith's example, have played critical roles in the success of both the United Kingdom Independence Party, or UKIP, and the Brexit Party. Goldsmith was willing to write huge checks to media outlets to pay for advertisements, but overall, he had a highly adversarial relationship to the British press, which he described as a load of filth. But the British press were more than happy to report on the Referendum Party and its billionaire leader. He made a great story. Tabloid newspapers like The Sun and the Daily Mail also had long-standing Eurosceptic tendencies themselves, and the Referendum Party message dovetailed nicely with the views of many influential editors. It would be wrong to say that the media took the Referendum Party very seriously, but they were still very happy to give it lots of free airtime and column inches. So that's legacy number 3. Small, Eurosceptic parties with charismatic leaders can expect significant earned media coverage in the UK. Nigel Farage, both during his time as leader of UKIP and the Brexit Party, endlessly used the same technique, first pioneered by Goldsmith. Like Goldsmith, Farage can usually be counted on to say something controversial or interesting, and that's something that journalists find impossible to resist. Goldsmith also introduced a major new innovation into British politics. Long before anyone had even thought of YouTube, he invented direct video communication with the voting public. In March 1997, the Referendum Party mailed 5 million video cassette tapes to households across the UK in packaging which said, "The most important video you'll ever watch." The video was, well, scary.
The true story of Europe. It's the story the politicians don't want you to hear, because it shows how they've deceived us and betrayed our nation. The plan is to create a federal European superstate.
Further integration of Europe was presented in apocalyptic terms. So that's legacy number 4, going around the media to speak directly to voters. This tactic was eventually adopted by every major party worldwide through social media, but the Referendum Party was certainly a pioneer. Another Referendum Party innovation was much less visible: the party's structure, or lack of it. Most political parties in the UK are mass membership organizations, and the members support the party's finances with their membership fees. Members also get to help choose the party's leader, and sometimes, depending on the party, they get to vote on official policies. The Referendum Party had only one member, James Goldsmith. Everyone else was just a registered supporter, even the hundreds of people who stood for office for the party. Supporters were not asked to pay any membership fees, but also they had no say in the party itself. This meant Goldsmith never had to answer to anyone else in the Referendum Party. He could do whatever he liked. This structure was later used by Nigel Farage when he set up the Brexit Party, which has only 3 official members: nominating officer Tracy Knowles, treasurer Murtash Azami, and Farage himself. Farage adopted this structure after years of internal strife inside UKIP, which is organized much more like a traditional party. With no Brexit Party grassroots to answer to, Farage is free to do what he does best: get media attention, unencumbered by accountability to a party infrastructure, which is exactly how Goldsmith ran the Referendum Party. So that is legacy number 5 for the Referendum Party. a successful template for a highly centralized, media-savvy style of campaigning with no pesky members who can get in the way. On paper, the election results for the Referendum Party were a disaster.
Incidentally, Sir James Goldsmith got 3.5%, lost his deposit. You need 5% not to lose your deposit. And the Referendum Party doesn't seem to be doing any better as a result of his standing there than it has been in the other places where it's been standing. Anyway.
The party received just over 800,000 votes, or just 2.5% of the overall vote. But on election night, Goldsmith claimed that the party had been highly successful after all.
Are you disappointed by your results so far?
No, you've got to understand, what are we? We're a pressure group. We didn't seek power for ourselves at any time. Our purpose was to break the unanimity of silence that existed and to get a debate on Europe. All the parties who refused referenda to start off with have become referendum parties. The Conservatives send out documents saying, we are the referendum party. Mr. Blair writes in The Sun, we are the referendum party. Mr. Ashdown says we're the referendum party. We're all referendum parties.
Was he right? Or was this just putting a brave face on what was, results-wise, a disaster? He was right. After the formation of the Referendum Party, both Labour and the Conservatives did pledge to hold referendums before joining the EU's single currency. The Conservative Party also became distinctly more Eurosceptic during the campaign to prevent their voters from defecting to the Referendum Party. This trend towards Euroscepticism in Tory politics continued long after the 1997 elections. In the 2001 elections, then leader William Hague more or less copied the Referendum Party's anti-Europe rhetoric and made it the centerpiece of his campaign. So that's legacy number 6, and perhaps the biggest one of all. Like the Referendum Party, both UKIP and the Brexit Party massively failed at the ballot box, at least in British parliamentary elections. But all three parties have regularly frightened both Labour and the Conservatives into adopting positions which ultimately advance their agendas. Most notably, Conservative leader David Cameron promised a referendum on EU membership in the 2015 election. He did this to try and steal votes from UKIP. That went well. The Referendum Party did not last long beyond the 1997 election, and that is primarily because the driving force behind the party, James Goldsmith, passed away a mere 6 weeks after the election. Goldsmith had been battling pancreatic cancer, something he decided to keep secret. He had been warned that continuing to campaign could shorten his life, but he kept campaigning anyway. Whether or not you agree with his politics, there can be no doubting his devotion to the cause. Without Goldsmith, the Referendum Party was not the same. The party disbanded soon after his death. The immediate beneficiary of the Referendum Party's demise was UKIP. UKIP actively recruited former Referendum Party candidates, eventually getting 160 of them to join, at least so Nigel Farage has claimed. But more importantly, the Referendum Party provided UKIP with a template for combining money from wealthy donors, earned media coverage, and a bit of celebrity into a political force which could frighten the bejesus out of the British political establishment. And, although neither UKIP nor the Brexit Party were ever very successful in British general elections, UKIP discovered they could be extremely effective in elections for the European Parliament, starting with their surprise breakthrough in 2004. There's one more Referendum Party legacy we still have to mention, though. In 1995, a member of the Conservative Party's Central Office communications team defected to the Referendum Party, where she headed up the press office for 2 years. That party-hopping communications executive has since rejoined the Conservatives and was elected to Parliament and currently serves as Home Secretary in Boris Johnson's Conservative Party government. Yes, I'm talking about Priti Patel.